So thank you for having me here today. I've been with ReSound now for 12 years. My background is in human resources and working in a variety of different businesses, got involved in the entertainment side of the industries, and then joined ReSound as it was a new profession to me with respect to the music side of entertainment, but certainly very similar to what I'd worked on in the past. It's a joy working there, and I'm really delighted that you invited us to join you today. So the next slide, please, Andrea. So for those of you who don't know us, we are the national not-for-profit licensing company dedicated to obtaining fair compensation for artists and record companies for their performance rights. We advocate for music creators, educate music users, license businesses, and distribute royalties, all to help build a thriving and sustainable music industry in Canada. Wah, wah. That's a lot of information in there. That elevator speech, most people, their eyes kind of glaze over when I say that. So I like to talk a little bit more about how we help transfer the value in music from the creators. That when a creator makes a piece of music, we take the use where the business uses it and earns money, and we transfer it to the individual who owns that. It's almost like real estate, where we're like the landlord. We collect the rights and distribute it to the owner. We often hear confusion from people about the difference between ReSound and SOCAN. So I want to go a little bit over that. I'm still on the one before there, Andrea. That's okay, it's hard to keep up. I'll let you know when you can change. So ReSound and SOCAN have a lot of similarities, but we're very, very different. We have a unique set of rights holders. So SOCAN represents the creators of the musical work, the song itself, the person who took a pen, put it to paper, and wrote the piece of music, or added the lyrics to that piece of music, or published it. So those are the rights holders that SOCAN represents. It is the musical work. ReSound represents the creators of the sound recording. So the actual track. We generally will refer to a track versus a song. The track it's the group of or a band. It could be a group of people, it could be individuals, the singer, it can be the drummer, it can be a feature performer, it can be a background session musician. So it's anybody who participated on that sound recording, and then the label who put it all together, who owns it. In some circumstances, there can be overlap. So for example, if you wrote a song and you performed on it, you would have rights when that song is used under your SOCAN rights, and you would have rights under your ReSound rights. So there's two areas that you'd need to coordinate with. And with the creators of a sound recording, it's feature performers, which a lot of people think of, but it's also all the session musicians, the background people. My daughter sang many years ago with the Canadian tenors, and she is a collector of royalties in that area. So next slide, Andrew, would be great. A little bit of history about ReSound. In 1997, the Copyright Act was amended and ReSound was created. Our former name, when I joined ReSound, it was called Neighboring Rights Collective of Canada. We changed the name in 2010 for a variety of reasons and wanted it to be a more succinct, succinct name. We are the single organization that administers the performance rights for all artists and record companies. So we are the one who files the Copyright Board. The organizations that I have listed under here, ActorRax, Artisty, MRock, Connect, and SoProc, are all of our members. So they're very involved in the distribution side of what we do. So prior to 1997, before ReSound existed, composers and music publishers received royalties if a song was played on the radio or in a public performance of their work. But the musicians, the creators of the sound recording, did not receive any royalties. So one of my favorite songs to think about is in 1998, one of the top songs played all over the world was My Heart Will Go On from the Titanic soundtrack. So the writers and publishers of that song earned every single time that song was played, but the performers and the label did not. So it's really hard to imagine how successful that song would or would not have been without Celine Dion being the featured performer. And she wasn't eligible for royalties in that role. So in 97 and prior to, the 5 member collectives, the organizations that represented artists and record labels, lobbied for change with the government. It resulted in the new Copyright Act in 97, now known as neighboring rights. The names now of the organizations I mentioned, Actor Rax, Artisti, MROC, Connect, and SOPROC. And the government decided that they needed to simplify the process. So they created the right. However, any one user of music couldn't figure out whose music they were playing and contact each of these 5 organizations. So they put ReSound together so that we would do the collection on behalf of those organizations. And ReSound is, as I mentioned, the only organization that is authorized to collect for the neighboring rights royalties in Canada. In 1997, we had only 1 tariff in commercial radio. Since then, we have a lot of tariffs. We collect in a lot of different areas. Last year aside, our revenues are in the range of 50 million a year of revenue that we collect. In 2008, neighboring rights was approximately 2% of recording revenue. In 2019, that's grown to 14 to 17%. So for example, if you have $100 that you as a performing artist collects, in 2008, $2 came from royalties, and now $17 to $18 is coming from royalties. So the amount in royalties areas is the pie chart is changing, particularly when there's no concerts. So we can go to the next slide, please, Andrea. We have 4 main areas that we work in. We seek for fair rights, royalty rates, for music creators. We work with businesses to make sure they're properly licensed to use recorded music. We work with international partners, and we work with our member organizations to make sure that those royalties get distributed. So the Copyright Board is who we work with in Canada. So we work with the Copyright Board. We suggest tariffs, we present evidence, and then royalty rates are created. When we're doing that, we're doing it obviously on behalf of artists and record companies. So we suggest what we believe to be a fair royalty rate based on the use of sound recordings, based on the value that that music adds to the particular type of business. So if you think about a restaurant can still serve food without music playing. It might not be as nice a restaurant, but it still works. You can still walk in, buy your hamburger, eat it, and leave, and you still get the business. But imagine a nightclub at the corner of King and John Street for those in Toronto, for those outside of the city. Think of Crescent in Montreal or Robson in Vancouver. At a nightclub, without music, it's not going to be a very successful business. So we look at how much value, economic value, does the music add to the business, and we propose royalty rates based on that, or tariff rates. In each of the tariffs that we propose to the Copyright Board, the Copyright Board hears from us. They look at the economic evidence that we've supplied. They also talk to other interested parties. So sometimes it's associations, sometimes it's individual music users, and then they set a fair rate, a balanced approach between all the interested parties that have put information. We also have to advocate on behalf of our rights holders. So it involves working with our member organizations, as well as other industry partners who share our objectives. And in addition to suggesting fair royalty rates with the Copyright Board, we also meet with politicians and policymakers to ensure that they understand how certain policies may impact creators. So again, an example. Based on the Copyright Act that defines a sound recording, if a work is used, a musical work is used in film or television, the people who wrote and published the music are compensated. However, the performer and the label are not. So again, that's something that we believe to be unfair. So we're working with that. Some of you may have heard of Miranda Mulholland, who speaks about this. She played on almost every episode of Republic of Doyle, which is syndicated worldwide and aired in 4 different countries. She was paid a one-time session rate somewhere in the range of $280, while the composer of that musical work receives royalties each and every time the song is aired. So to address this, we meet with politicians and policymakers to advocate for change. And this is more elected officials and bureaucrats beyond just the Copyright Board. We can share the link, mirandamulholland.ca, and she has an advocacy page, so we can share that link with you afterwards. The next thing that we work on is making sure that businesses who are using recorded music are getting their licenses appropriately. We license either directly or through In Tandem, which is our joint venture with SOCAN. We do extensive outreach to music users, including radio stations, Sirius XM, fitness facilities, nightclubs, background music users, bars, restaurants, etc. And sometimes they're associations. So in a lot of circumstances, we'll work with a group of, so for example, if there's a hotel association, we may work with them rather than the individual hotels. So we work with them to make sure that they understand the obligations and to set up a process for them to license the music that they use. The fees are then collected on behalf of artists and record companies, and we distribute them to our member organizations who represent thousands of creators, and in some cases directly to rights holders. In the area of international partnerships, we actively engage with similar organizations around the world, sharing best practices and knowledge. The metadata behind music is the same everywhere, and music crosses boundaries, geographical boundaries, so we want to make sure that we reach out to all of those organizations. ReSound has been actively involved with organizations like IFPI, the International Federation of Phonographic Industry, creating standards for data collection and sharing trying to increase the efficiencies of music-related metadata around the world. Things like ISRC codes. Those are very important to us because it's the unique identifier for a track. In some circumstances, ReSound collects royalties outside of Canada, as does our member organizations. When it comes to distributing royalties, we make sure that the artists and the record labels who created the recorded music that we've licensed are appropriately compensated. To make sure that the right people and companies are receiving their royalties, we have a very large team of distribution experts who analyze and administer a huge volume of data. We receive thousands of logs from music users and import them into our data system. I'm not a technical person. I always say we mush them all together. We match the tracks against our records, and then we essentially create a value per play. We receive and review claims from our members, and finally, we pay out the royalties to our members. We are also a not-for-profit organization, just like MMF, and 80% of the royalties that we collect, over 80%, are distributed to our members and directly to rights holders. Radio stations, just an interesting little fact. In 2012, radio stations only had to report their music use for 14 days. We didn't think that was necessarily the best way to do things, so we worked with the Copyright Board to have now 365-day reporting. But you can imagine what that did to the volume in our databases, because we went from a 14-day sampling system to a full logs from radio stations. So massive, massive database. You can switch to the next slide, Andrea, please. So I want to talk a little bit more about the royalties and how it all works. I'll give you a few definitions that I'll be using as well. The Copyright Act of Canada, that's the act that governs how and when creators are compensated. And it's worth noting that while we consider it in the context of music, for ReSound, the Copyright Act also works for all sorts of written work, artwork, other intellectual property beyond ReSound. When I refer to royalties, those are the fees that music users such as radio stations and streaming services are legally obligated in order to use the recorded music. A tariff is essentially the kind of cost that the businesses will have to pay for using music. We don't love talking about tariffs in public because most people think it's a tax. And this is not a tax. This is paying the owners of the music when it is being used. So we try to avoid the word tariff. We refer to the piece of paper that the Copyright Board has. It's not really a piece of paper, but when they set a rate and the parameters for that rate, that itself is the tariff, but we try not to use that too much. And when it comes to background music, I think a lot of people think about the music that might be in a film, but that's not referred to as background. What background music is, again, I talked about the restaurant. That's a perfect example where it's something that's going on in the background of the business, but the business could operate anyways. And it's things like grocery stores, restaurants, clothing stores. I'm going to put my mic on mute for a second. I have to cough. My apologies, I'm back. So we can move to the next slide, Andrea, which is a flow chart. This is going to be a little bit small, probably to see on some of the screens, because I did notice some people are on their phones. You can access this on our website as well at resound.ca. So this is the flow chart of how we distribute our royalties. So the first thing that happens, I talked about the copyright board. They are responsible for the certification of tariffs. Each tariff is specific to the music use category and specifies the rates for the use, as well as the dates. So a tariff is only covered for a certain period, and then we have to reapply for tariffs afterwards. We have a lot of lawyers on staff. We work with external counsel, and we partner a lot with other organizations to make sure that we can get the best rates possible for our rights holders. Then we have to identify, then we have to collect the royalties, and that's the tough part, or one of the tough parts. We identify who the users of recorded music are, and then we work with them to collect the licensing fee. When it comes to something like a radio station, it's really easy. They're in the business, they completely understand what it is that they're working on. But when it comes to the individual users of music, restaurants, bars, it's a much more difficult task. Think of the main street of a small town near you. How many of those music users, those businesses, really even understand that they're supposed to be paying for it, let alone how do we find them? So we joined with SOCAN because SOCAN has very similar rights for public performance. We joined with SOCAN and created a joint venture called In Tandem a year and a half ago, coming up to 2 years. In this joint venture, we contact the businesses and we secure the licenses on behalf of SOCAN and ReSound at the same time, simplifying the licensing of music. We had heard a lot from music users. It's so complicated. It's so hard to do. Can you make this easier for us? So in this, we contact all businesses across Canada to work with them to establish licenses. And as I said, if we can get through to associations instead, like a hotel association, we will. It's a much easier way to do things. But generally, we try to reach out to every business. And then we then need to figure out whose royalties have been used. I mentioned our distribution team. We receive thousands of logs. We put them into our system, match them all up, and send the money out. We have distribution rules. So if you're interested more in how that actually works, I'd suggest you take a look at our website, and you'll find all the rules about how splits are done, how the various processes exist. And we have a distribution committee, a group of interested people who create those rules. It's not just like somebody in a back room makes it up. It's actually a committee. In addition, I mentioned that there's a process for the international exchange of revenue. So for example, if a song written or is performed by a Canadian musician is played in UK and collected royalties in the UK, we do a data and dollar transfer between all the organizations as appropriate based on the agreements that are in place. And we can go to the next slide, please, Andrea. So I'm going to go very quickly over our tariffs. They're fairly simple. The first one, broadcasting, was the first tariff that we had. It includes commercial radio, CBC, community radio stations, etc. And there's been a lot of change in the broadcast industry since I joined ReSound. A lot of consolidation in radio groups that is changing how we have to work with them. Very, very interesting stuff. Pay audio is satellite and cable TV providers often have options for music channels. My personal favorite is the Galaxy stations, the adult entertainment, channel 903. That's what I receive best in my home. Satellite is Sirius XM. It's the only provider at this point in Canada, and it's most consumed in cars. So the vehicle purchases keep this one going because so many car companies put SiriusXM into the vehicles for a trial period with the intent to continue to upsell people once it's dropped off its free trial period. Background music, we have two different tariffs in the area of background music. One is through a supplier, and the other is if you're using your own source of music. Live events is a tariff name that I never love because we don't represent live music, but at live events, recorded music can be used. There are 11 different types of tariffs in there. Things like when music is used at a sporting event, if you're at a hockey game, they're often using music there, or when it's used at a parade or a magic show. Dancing, that's an easy one. When dancing is the predominant activity. Adult entertainment, don't think I need to explain that one. Physical activity is fitness centers when the actual music is being used in the class of the fitness class. And music streaming is the tariff that covers streaming when it's non-interactive and semi-interactive only. If it's a fully interactive service, this tariff doesn't count. We did have a couple of questions that came in advance that are related to the tariff, so I'll cover them off a little bit now. Somebody had asked a question about internet-based radio stations. So there's currently no certified tariff for commercial radio simulcasting, but we have a proposed one that goes back to 2009, which we're expecting to get certified soon. For webcasting and non-interactive or semi-interactive streaming services, they're covered under the tariff T8 or streaming tariff, including things like the iHeartRadio online stations. Interactive services or on-demand streaming and downloads would be licensed directly by the labels and are not covered by T8 or the streaming tariff. We also had a question that came in about CRTC's position and their role in streaming platforms. So I can't really answer too much about CRTC's position, but I can talk to you lots about ReSounds because we've been very vocal on fair compensation for rights holders. We're dedicated in our efforts to put the best foot forward to make sure that the evidence that we produce to the Copyright Board representing the value of music for things like the streaming tariffs are well represented. We'll continue to advocate and make sure that music creators are fairly paid for their work. Another interesting question that we hear regularly, if someone is receiving airplay for only certain types of tariffs, how are the royalties paid out for the tariffs that don't report airplay? So a restaurant is not obligated to report what music they're using. Imagine how cumbersome that would be to a restaurant. I'm serving your French fries, but I also have to write down what song is currently on the system that we're playing. So at this point, we're working the policies under our distribution committee. We're using proxy data. So there's a methodology that's done where we look at what is the most likely proxy that's going to work for that tariff. So it's as much of the airplay information that we can get. But I think it's an area that's going to change a lot in the near future because technology and the improvement of data systems will probably increase the accuracy and lessen the need for proxy data. And we can go to the next slide, Andrea. So music creators, I don't think I need to convince this audience at all, but when I speak to business owners, which as I sometimes do, I don't have to convince you that your music has value. If you are a music creator, a recording artist, a performer, a session musician, or a label, and your music is used in broadcast or played in public, you may be entitled to royalties. So we like to talk about the value of music and how it can influence customer spending behaviors. And this is some of what we do in our in tandem part of our operation. We can improve the mood of our customers. We can change their behaviors. We can improve the productivity of employees and more just by using music. There was a great piece of research done in the UK in a restaurant where none of the servers were at all involved and French music was being played all night in the restaurant. The next night, they played all Italian music. Lo and behold, when they looked at the wine sales, French wine was sold on the first night, Italian wine was sold on the second night. So just by music use and playing certain types of things, you can influence your customers. We do have an example of this research that we can put in the chat as well. There's a lot of music suppliers that we work with that will work with retailers to create a playlist that's specifically targeted to their market to attract and entertain their customers and influence their spending. I challenge all of you, the next time you're in a grocery store, stop through an aisle and listen to what's playing on the music, on the sound system in the grocery store. They are the kings and queens of choosing the right music. If I went to a grocery store outside of my regular time or outside of my regular neighborhood, maybe different part of Toronto, I might not actually know the music that's being played. But when I go to the grocery store near my house at 5:30 on my way home for work, they have me exactly. I catch myself singing by the time I hit the pasta aisle each and every time because they know who I am. Those affinity cards that we all carry, there's a lot of data in those. They know where we are in the store and what we're buying. They also know what kind of music we like to listen to. I challenge you also, the next time you're out shopping with a teenage child or niece or nephew, go into a store with them and see if you like the music that's being played. The beats per minute, the volume, the genre of the music can all affect your customers. So as creators of recorded music, I want to talk a little bit about how you collect all those things. So we have a spectacular database on our website. It is going to tell you if a recording has appeared in a broadcast or user log. So it gets updated on an annual basis. We're just finishing off 2020 now. Remembering again, it's 365-day reporting, so we have a massive amount of data. It's usually done by about the beginning of the second quarter each year. If a track appears in our database and you have performed on it or you own the master, you may have royalties waiting for you. If you're registered with one of ReSound's member organizations, Actor Rex, Artisty, MRock, Connect, or SoapRock, or with ReSound directly, you want to contact that organization to make sure you're collecting your royalties on it. It's important to understand, though, that airplay doesn't necessarily guarantee royalties. There are eligibility requirements that need to be met, things like the year of the recording, nationality, and where it was recorded, or the country of fixation. Or it may be that it was played once and that it had one track, one spin, as we call it, at a radio station that doesn't have a large audience. So it may actually be appearing in our log, but not have high value per play, or VPP. Also in that section of our website, you'll also find a schedule that tells you all about all of our deadlines as well, which are important. If we could go to the next one, please, Andrea. So this is just a screenshot of our database. You'll see it says enter a track or artist name, and then click to the next one. Just for fun, I did The Weeknd because I was watching the halftime show at the Super Bowl. And here is a list of tracks that Weeknd shows in our database. So this tells us that it has airplay, that there is airplay for those tracks in Canada. So it means that there may be royalties associated with them. Okay, next slide. So now that you know that there may be royalties, you need to sign up if you haven't already. There are options in Canada for rights assignment, and we encourage creators to research the various options to determine what's best for them. It's a two-step process. You have to sign up first, and then you must submit your repertoire, and within the applicable deadlines, obviously, in order to receive your royalties. It's also really important for people to keep their repertoire up to date. So sometimes someone will sign up 5 years ago, and then there's 4 years and 3/4 of repertoire that hasn't been submitted to us. It's really important to do your research to figure out which is the right organization for you. As a performer, there are the 3, and as a maker or a label, there are the 2. As well, in both circumstances, you can assign directly to ReSound. But each of these organizations offer different services. Some you may, it might be a language-based thing for some people. It could be who their next door neighbor is signed up with, but you need to do the research and see what meets your needs, because each of us has very different needs in what we're looking for. In some circumstances, you need to sign up on both sides as a performer and a maker, because you may own your own track, your own masters. So in that circumstance, you'll need to sign up in both. And the best way to get answers from about the member organizations is to look either at their websites or reach out to them. So I believe when Andrea sends out the presentation, these are all live links that you'll be able to click on and find the organizations. And I mentioned as well, don't forget to keep your repertoire up to date. The next page. We have a lot of industry collaborations that organizations that we do work with. I've got a few just listed up here: CMW, the Canadian Live Music Association, Junos, Polaris. Obviously, I put MMF on here as well. We work with industry partners because we want to make sure that the understanding of neighboring rights in Canada is elevated. We know it's copyright. It's a bundle of rights. It gets very, very confusing, and we want to help elevate the understanding of how royalties are collected and how they get distributed. The next one is a fun party picture. So this is a little bit about ReSound as a place to work. This is a picture from 2019 when we did our, we have an annual fundraiser concert called Rewind. 40% of our employees are active in the music industry outside of their ReSound work. They're performing, they're promoting, they're running concerts, recording, etc. This was 2019. In July of this year, we did an online version, July of last year, we did an online version instead of our traditional in-person show. And we raised $28,000 in support of the Unison Benevolent Fund and the Alzheimer's Society Music Project. We always do fundraisers for music-related charities. We try to do one national and one smaller group each time, and our employees get very involved in picking which charities we were supporting. If you'd like to check out the concert, it is available on our YouTube. We also host a great series in our office called Artists in the Office. It's a chance for us to share our work with artists and allow our employees to hear from the artist directly. When we're doing it in person, we actually bring artists into the office, set up a little corner. We do acoustic only because we are in an office tower. And we have the artists share their stories about the creative processes, the influences, things about the artists' lives, and we enjoy their great work. We've had some really well-known artists come in, like William Prince, 5440, and emerging artists like Pterodactyl Problems and Julian Taylor. We do this series right now 4 times per year, and we're continuing to hold them remotely at this point. If you'd like to find out more, I invite you to reach out to us because we'd love to have some artists come and perform with us. And you'll find, again, some examples of former ones are on our YouTube channel.